Hello? All right. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, we're just going to get started here. And so this is the SIG CLI deep dive. If you thought you were supposed to be someplace else, you can leave now. But yeah, today I think, great.
Why did you broke it?
Well, that actually works out fine. Okay,
good.
there we go. So I thought that maybe we'd start by taking questions from the audience. I have a number of slides, but with a small audience like this, I'd actually like to kind of figure out why folks are here, what you think I was going to talk about, and then I can kind of modify the content to fit that.
Your slides went away again.
I know. So yeah, maybe you won't get to see those after all. Okay. So why are you all here? Jenny, why are you here? And you felt like supporting me?
I was actually hoping that someone will raise in. I want to contribute to Kubernetes. I want to contribute. Docs are fine. Tests are fine.
You want to bring the mic over, and then he can speak into it.
Hi. So pretty much what you said.
You want to contribute?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do this. Who is here because they want to learn how to contribute? Raise your hands. Yes. Okay. From that group, okay, I want to see someone who didn't raise their hands. Who's here? Great. Why are you here?
I'm here to learn how to write a great CLI to avoid some of the... Yeah, sorry. So I'm here to learn a bit from kubectl or control or however you call it.
Yeah.
And also I want to learn how to spell, how to name it, or how to call the name.
So
no. And yeah, I'm keen to understand where you're headed and why. And yesterday in the intro, I picked up that there are some decisions made regarding like changing where logic is located in the CLI or in the API side, etc., etc. And this sounds like something to learn in general to me, because we're providing CLI and an API as well, and yeah, and I'm also a user, so, and I might end up contributing a fix here or there. I don't know, UX-wise maybe. Thanks.
great.
Yes, UX-wise, if you're happy or willing to help us with the UX, more than welcome as well.
Who is here to ask or find out about something specific like plugins or apply or some particular topic? Oh, you, sir.
No, sorry. Actually, I've attended your intro talk, and fundamentally, I'm a very lazy guy. So, and I don't like to type so much. So I thought I will attend this and see what are the opportunities to type less and streamline things a bit, and I'll find out a bit more about how it actually works. I found the plugin things very actually it was new, and I found it very cool and useful straight away.
Okay, fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through just some content about the philosophically where the CLI is headed, right? And how we used to develop commands. If you were to come to the code base today and say, how does this work? And then file a PR, why we'd tell you you're doing it completely wrong because you copied what we've already done. And so you can actually kind of see where the ball is headed rather than where it's at. But I will try and tailor that towards the perspective of a new contributor, like where are the opportunities here. Do you mind if I actually take the mic because I work better when I walk?
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, we can swap. That's the thing. Okay, so like what are our goals? And if you were to come contribute, like what are the things we'd want you to be thinking about in terms of how do we push kube control forward, right? And so the big ones are how do we support client version SKU? This is really important because there are many versions of Kubernetes folks run. There's unsupported versions of Kubernetes folks run. Different people are downloading different versions of the CLI. And it's a problem if something bad happens when you mismatch those, right? We don't want someone to have a production outage simply because they downloaded an old version of kube control and upgraded their cluster and now the things don't work together. Support for extensions and CRDs and these sorts of things. This is actually really closely related to the version SKU piece and the Solutions for how we addressed it are actually pretty much the same. But this is essentially, for non-compiled in types, how do we allow users to produce functionality, right? And so if you are here wanting to contribute to the CLI, but maybe also write controllers or extensions, this would be very interesting to you. We want to increase the pace of development, or rather, I should say, we want to reduce the overhead for contribution, right? We want to make it so when you fix a bug, it's not 3 months before the first person gets a release of that, and then another 9 months before generally you can expect people to be running it in most places, right? And we want to start moving towards a more consistent philosophy around how the commands look. Today we have kubectl run, we have kubectl expose, we have kubectl autoscale. We also have kubectl create deployment, kubectl create config map, kubectl create secret. There's 2 ways to imperatively create a deployment, run and create deployment. But they support different sets of flags, and philosophically, they had authors who had different feelings about how it should be done. Someone wrote run, and they said, I think we should provide every flag in the world so you never have to touch any declarative stuff.
Yeah, thankfully that's why we deprecated run.
That's why we deprecated it, right? Someone else wrote deployment, and they said, you know what, this is really about bootstrapping some config so that a user can type help, find out a set of options, type those in, then get some YAML out from that, and then go from there. And if they need to tune the CPU of a specific container, then they do that declaratively with the API. But at that point, they have something working that they can go off of, right? So just get people started. So this gives you an idea of why we're focusing on the things we're focusing on. So one initiative is around API agnostic commands. These are commands that are compiled into the client, such as apply, such as get. They don't really care about, or they don't have compiled in specific types. If you add a new type to the API server, right, or you add a CRD, they don't treat that type any differently than a deployment or a pod or anything else, right? And this is really the bread and butter of the CLI. I think this is where we want to focus our energy the most. This is where, when you go down to the sponsors booth, people are thinking about it this way, right? It's like if you're doing GitOps or you're checking your config in, you're using one of these commands. If you're going through declarative workflows, you're using one of these things. Because declarative workflows have all the schema and all the data built right into a file. So it's right there. And some of the things these use are the Open API, the discovery service, and other services running in the cluster. If you don't know, Kubernetes has a thing called the discovery service. What the discovery service is it tells all the APIs that the APIs or the cluster knows about. And so then you can go take some YAML config, find the resource that matches it, the set of endpoints, and then go and send the operation there. So it can figure out, does it support patch? Does it support post? What sort of things? Does it support dry run? What else do we got going? Ecosystem interoperability. I think this is a really high-level thing. As a new contributor, I wouldn't expect you to have to solve this problem. But as a new contributor coming with your own unique perspective, having used probably other tools and looked at them, I think we would really value your feedback here, right? And what this is really about is there's a lot of development in the ecosystem for different ways of authoring resource config, for validating resource config, for orchestrating its rollout, right? And different lifecycle hooks supported by different frameworks and these sorts of things, right? And how, as the Kubernetes project, can we facilitate interoperability or low-level tooling to enable the ecosystem, right? So we don't actually have a solution here. We have some ideas around, like, can we support the ability to, for someone in the ecosystem to write an adapter that takes however they generate their config and make it look like a raw YAML config, right? And then so you can kubectl apply something like helm chart.yaml, which looks like a Kubernetes resource, and then your plugin will go find, like, refer to a helm chart, refer to some values, turn that into YAML, and now you can apply it directly, right? And so now you get this declarative workflow for things that weren't accessible. You can do this for JSONet, right, with a JSONet adapter. So there's some ideas there on that. This is a big unsolved problem, but I think it would be really cool if we allowed folks to pick and choose multiple ecosystem solutions, right? And say, I need a Helm chart for this, but this is actually in a K-Net thing because it was written for Kubeflow. And my engineers don't want 5 different solutions they're interacting with, right? They want like a one simple interface. Plugins. Okay, plugins are fun. So many people are interested in plugins. I always ask why, right? And different people think of different things when they hear plugins, right? Some folks think of plugins and they think, oh, we have some way of like injecting some random piece of execution into kubectl apply. So between applying the first resource and the second resource, it does this random thing, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about here when we say plugins is basically discoverability, right? And a little bit of consistency. The idea being users are used to interacting with kubectl. If they are doing Kubernetes, can they just type kubectl help and find your command there, and then it's discoverable, right? And you combine that with this consistency of perhaps using the CLI runtime library, so you get the same set of flags for interacting with resources, same set of behaviors. Or if you are doing something in another language where you can't use CLI runtime, at least there is a convention for how flags are used that you can adhere to, right? And so a user kind of gets an expected behavior. But again, these are just basically binary executables that appear as kubectl subcommands. Another initiative is the notion of discoverable commands, right? So I mentioned that the APIs themselves are discoverable if you're going from a declarative YAML config, right? But what about the kubectl create deployment? I've had a number of folks from projects come to me and say, hey, we've written these CRDs. Now I want kubectl create whatever my CRD is, right? Because I want that nice behavior of bootstrapping YAML config. How do we provide that? Well, plugins is one option, which means that user has to go and download and install another binary, which might be whitelisted by your organization and might not be whitelisted by your organization, right? And then now you're responsible for updating that thing. And now that has a different set of version skew than everything else, right? So we already have a problem with version skew between client and server that I mentioned. And with the built-in commands today, kubectl create deployment, those suffer from that. Because if you add a new field to the API, and then you want to update the command to also have that field, right? Well, what happens if the command's newer than the server? Well, it's going to specify the field the server doesn't know about, right? Or what if the command's older than the server? Well, now you don't get all the functionality that you would get from the newest server, right? So those, I think, are something that, like I was saying, if you went and did a new kubectl create command or added some new flags to kubectl create command, we'd be like, no, this is really not the direction we want to head. Instead, the direction we think is very promising is looking at how do browsers interact with websites, right? When a browser interacts with a website, it doesn't compile in all the pages from that website, right? It gives the browser a form, right? Then the user fills in that form and posts it back. And we could do something similar from a perspective of if all the client is doing is creating a resource by user filling in some fields just like they would in a form, and then sending a request to a specific API point in the server, well, that's just data. What's the API point? How do I take that set of fields and then put it into some JSON object, right? And then how do I take the output and format it into a response? Very simple, right? No version skew problems because the server itself is publishing them. When you update the server, you get a new set of flags, right? So this is something we already have a prototype for in something called CLI runtime, or CLI experimental, sorry. It's in CLI experimental today. It's kind of looking for someone to own it and drive it forward. The prototype code is there, it works, it's tested, but there's no one there saying, well, when a user has an issue with this or files a feature request, this person has enough capacity to go own that thing, right? And so that's kind of what we're looking for. And generally from contributors, new contributors, I think that's going to be the most helpful thing is not this like, hey, I added this flag that you now need to maintain forever, right? And instead, you already have to maintain this stuff, and I'm willing to learn about it and then answer questions on it and figure out better ways doing it. The way that the prototype has implemented this is two ways. The first is it just defines a CRD type, right? And the CRD type has a set of fields which essentially allow the command to, or the CLI to create a Cobra command and then give it to the user and then send the request. The second is just as an annotation on the CRDs themselves. And so this means you don't have to install a new CRD or cluster. You don't have to do anything new. All you have to do is just do a list, or rather what the CLI does is the CLI just lists which CRDs have a label that says they have a command on them. And then it will take that list, look for the annotation, parse the data structures, and then create the Cobra commands. There's some optimizations that could be done here to reduce the number of requests, or the listing operation, for instance, right? And take, well, what path did the user type in, and now only actually list the commands that actually have that specific path, or something like that. So it could be optimized, but it works. Last thing I'm going to talk about is KubeControl migration outside of the main repo. Developing customized outside of the main repo, one thing we learned was it's a lot easier, right? You don't have to wait 3 months to be able to give a new feature to end users, right, and start getting feedback on it, because folks were downloading customized at a faster release cycle. The testing is a lot easier to unit test, or like focus on testing one piece of this thing. If you create a PR to Kubernetes to add some command to KubeControl, well, you're going to run all the tests in the world. You're going to run all the ADE tests. You're going to run all this stuff, and some of those are going to flake, and they're going to have nothing to do with your code, right? But you're going to have to deal with it anyway, because the tests have to pass, right? You have a code freeze, right? A code slush that lasts for an extended period of time. And if you want to like add new dependencies, right? You add Go modules, for instance, right? Well, that's like centrally maintained for the entire project, right? So you're not just adding them to your particular binary, you're adding them to everyone, which isn't great. So by having them decoupled in separate repos, we get a lot of benefits. We've been trying to move KubeControl out for about 2 years. We expect next 6 to 9 months we'll actually have the code in a separate repo, and then it will be probably another year after that before it's completely decoupled in every sense of the word. But we're making a lot of progress there, and it should be easier soon.
The 6-9 months that Phil said separate repo means that we will have something inside of Kubernetes repo which lives in staging repo, which is like a mid-step towards removing to a separate repo. It ensures that we cannot depend on Kubernetes stuff, but it is sufficient to prevent folks from importing stuff that would break us when we will be actually ready to move it into a separate repo. There's a lot of issues with release and testing that we need to solve to do the final move. And honestly, nobody had the guts so far to move out of staging, and we are the first brave ones to do it.
Yeah, so no one has today moved code into staging and then moved it from staging to actually another place. If you don't know what staging is a directory inside Kubernetes that's linked into effectively the vendor repo, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like it's vendored, but it's not. It's actually the source of truth for that code.
And to make it more confusing, we are publishing the contents of the staging repos into, in our case, that will be under Kubernetes kubectl repo. So even though they will be the code inside of Kubernetes kubectl repo, it will match what we have currently in Kubernetes, because as of today, it does not match at all. Still, the PRs will have to be done against the Kubernetes main repo inside of the staging. Only once we actually get it out, we will move the full development cycles onto the kubectl repo.
Yeah, so if you're reading that code, it looks like it's moved out. If you're writing that code, it looks like it's in. But it's not obvious if you're writing that code until you get the message, don't send PRs here, or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the plan is to publish it out of there, or to, eventually move it out. We're also looking at building new commands as plugins, right? So the cost of development in Kubernetes, the overhead, is incredibly high. And we're looking at like how would we write apply today with a status or wait, right? So you apply today, you apply something, you create a new deployment, it has 100 replicas, and it says, okay, none of those pods are running. The image might be bad, no one knows, right? The apply says, that's great, we're good. So, like, if you're actually trying to orchestrate something, right? If you're actually trying to roll something out and you want to know, hey, was that successful? Can I go get a beer now? It'd be nice to have some sort of status in there. And kubectl itself today has a tiny little bit of that, but we'd like to see like a really first-class notion of that. Something that works for CRDs, something that can report whether it failed or was healthy and looks at all of the pieces, something that allows you to time out, for instance, after a certain amount of time, something that actually waits for a minimum amount of time, so like even if it reports it as all being healthy, it will actually wait until some certain check passes, looks at conditions, these sorts of things. Pruning is another one. If you're familiar with kubectl apply prune, there are some challenges with trying to use labels alone for identifying resources. Those challenges include, what resources do I look at? Like, I can query at it for an individual resource type, give me everything that matches these labels, right? But really what you need to do is give me every single resource type you know about and give me all the things that match these labels, right? And so that actually can do quite a few requests to the API server. Also, if you screw up those labels a little bit, right? What if you start matching more things or matching fewer things because you mismatch what prune is doing versus the labels you've actually set, or you're doing a different sub-target. You can end up deleting things you didn't intend to or not deleting the right things. So we've been looking at different techniques for improving prune. One of them is to do pretty much what everyone else in the world does, and it works. It's not the best thing in the world, but it works, which is just when you apply, record like the keys of all the things you apply, right? And the next time you apply, you knew what you did last time, and you can check that way, right? And you're not doing these large queries. There's advantages and disadvantages of that, but it's been used enough that we kind of understand what the disadvantages are, and we can live with them. Another approach that's been suggested and is clever is to try and leverage garbage collectors, right? And do a shifting of owners references when you apply, right? So you have one object on the left side and everything's pointing to that, right? And then now when you apply something, you move it over to a new object, right? So everything gets reparented, right? And when you delete a parent, everything under it will go away, right? So you reparent everything under a new one, you delete the old one, and now everything that's still pointing to the old one wasn't part of the apply, and goes away and gets garbage collected, right? And so that is a clever approach I don't think has been explored as much. Some question of like orchestrating the creation of the objects and deletion of the objects, and having to update each one of these owners references. What else do I have? I think that's it. Yeah, okay, that's it. Questions? I can sit up here and talk about this stuff for the whole time, but I actually do think I could also do that at talk, right? And I think what's nice about the deep dives and intro sessions is that there's a small number of us here. Yes?
I have a question. This morning, the behavior of kubectl diff, that if there is a diff runs like exit code non-zero even when the diff completed. We found it in a pipeline that we did like a diff to be able to check that everything that's going to change is what is expected. And we found that by default, it raises an error code even the diff complete. So it's hard to check if the kubectl failed because the YAML was not correct or wasn't able to connect to the server, or because it's just there is a change. So you need like to check if the output of the diff does something more than one line, and then check if it's an error code or not.
Okay, so I think the question was, this is the new kube control diff, I'm guessing? The dry run style, not the client-side diff.
Yes, the kube control diff something. If there is a change, exits with non-zero exit code.
Okay, I'm going to say something and then Ginny will confirm whether that's true or not, because she's the diff master. The way I believe diff was supposed to behave, at least the old one that I'm more familiar with, exited non-zero if there was a change. I think that's what the diff command does. Anyway, like the real diff command. No.
It did a flag. By default, if the diff ends correctly, ends with exit code 0 because it ended properly, and there's a flag that forces like if there is a change, exit code should be non-zero. But it's a flag.
Yes, I think the client-side diff had that as well. I remember someone filed an issue about it. I thought it actually got implemented. Maybe I'm misremembering though. But
Yeah,
that sounds like a no.
Yeah, that sounds like a bug. Like
Okay,
bug
it
on
sounds
our
like a
side.
bug. There should be
Yeah.
a flag. I thought there was one, but maybe it just got filed as an issue.
I don't think we want to diverge from the regular diff behavior. It just sounds
Yeah, although
silly.
the other thing I thought was that it just shelled out to the diff tool.
I can't
Like
remember.
I thought it shelled out to a
I
diff
can't
tool.
remember. Yeah, fill in the bug.
Let's
And
yeah,
ping or-
file a bug.
and ping on Slack, please ping on
There is
Slack.
a real
Yeah,
reason behind.
no, that makes sense. I think we would want to have a consistent behavior between diffs, whether you're doing
Yeah.
one locally or on the server and whatnot. Should behave.
That was not an intentional choice.
We have a few places where people complain about the exit code being not consistent with what they would expect, meaning that we always return non-zero or we should be returning 0 and something is found. I know that people are fixing those issues as they approach each of them, as they found those.
The problem here is it will be hard to keep back compatibility because it's the default behavior. So, for example, in my pipeline, I have like something to handle this behavior.
We can manage that one through a deprecation warning. In case of even existing commands, this is done so that we introduce a flag, keep that flag off so that people can opt into the new behavior, and after globally accepted terms, which is for GA 12 months or 3 releases, whichever is longer, we can flip the switch as we want to. But we need to go the usual deprecation path, and that's one of the reasons that we want to get out of the main repo as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer is we can definitely introduce a flag so you can have it however you want it, and then we can figure out what the best way to update the default behavior if we feel it should be changed.
Can I work on that?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can absolutely work on that. Why don't you send an email to SIG CLI and then create an issue, and then we'll assign
Yeah.
it to you, and there you go. Awesome.
Are there any
Does
other?
anyone else have an issue that they would like to fix?
Hi, so basically, I don't know, 2 months ago, I go through the source code of the kubectl, and I saw that there is a couple of different approaches to, for example, to use the client Go in your commands. So, for example, the different commands using different approaches to create that one. And do you have some kind of the document about the best practices and the idea which one should be used there? That was the first question. And second was also connected with the errors. Do you have also some patterns or want to add something like that? If you use the kubectl, then get some errors, but not the human readable, but which can be used directly in the some scripting. Right now we have a problem that we don't want to create a program in Go to know that something is not found or something like that. We just want to do that in directly in Bash because it was really, really easy to do that with kubectl. But we don't want to parse the error message like, it's getting not found. Okay,
Yeah.
it should be something like that.
So So with regards to the letter, I think there was an issue somewhere in the kubectl Kubernetes repo that people would like to see different exit codes applied over to kubectl. That is completely valid request. I think what we would have to do is, in the first place, set up some standards. How those exit codes would work, I think it is completely valid request to have a standard on those codes. So somebody would have to sit down, write a cap, talk through about it during one of the SIG calls. And if the majority will agree, and I'm pretty sure that there will be people interested in, then we just have to standardize that and start coding that into all of the commands. That's basically what we would have to do, at least with the new ones. Not sure if, how far we want to go with the old ones.
Actually, that's a good point to raise. Maciej and I were talking yesterday, a couple days ago at the face-to-face about like where are we going to focus on kube control, right? And I think the vision we had is that most of the imperative commands we are going to list as kind of under maintenance mode, right? And it's not that we won't accept any features or new flags for them, but you will need to find someone to actually support that, right? In that it tends to not be as high priority as the declarative agnostic workflows and the dynamic workflows and the commands, the ones I talked about earlier. So actually, can I ask what specific commands are you talking about? Is that like the apply commands and the diff commands and these sorts of things, or is it like the kube control runs and the kube control create deployments?
Basically, it was about the create to get. So, for example, if you have some conflict there, you want to know that it was already the name is already exists, something like that. Right, so now we need to pass the message, so it's not.
Okay, and
we need to go with the relation go.
So it's the do you say it's the imperative create
both.
command?
There were both. So create. We'll be going, as Phil said, towards the direction of declarative commands. So we will be shifting over to the server to be able to figure out how to provide the form and move over in that direction. The actual run and create commands, the current one that are there, will be the ones that we would like to freeze. Run is already deprecated in 99% of cases. The only allowed case for run is to create a pod. And the reason for that is we want to mimic the Docker run functionality, but instead of running a container, we will be actually running a pod.
Actually, can I ask something?
Yeah.
We just got 1 minute. I wanted to get something in here.
We still have the other question. I need to answer it.
Okay, real quickly. Do you those create commands, right? Given that, so first of all, fixing the error code seems totally reasonable, and that level of continuing to do stuff is fine, right?
And we need to have a cap for that one in the first place.
And we'll need to have a cap for it and do the normal process. But you're using it, like it would be maybe helpful to have a follow-up discussion of like why you're using it. Do you see the dynamic commands being a replacement for these things? Do you see a declarative workflow being a replacement for the way you're using it, or like what do we actually need to support? Because
we would be very interested in having people help us with those. Like Phil said earlier today, the CLI experimental. And when he was actually talking about it, I realized when I was hearing Stefan earlier today talking about OpenAPI, we could actually reuse the OpenAI information about what we should fill with regards to the name type and whether it's required. Since we already have that data on the server with the work that is being done in API machinery for OpenAPI. I'm not sure how much the V2 that we publish is usable, but if they start publishing the V3, we will have full information about how the object should look like.
We should have a get together, a little meeting about discussion for that.
And to answer the first question of yours, client Go. So the majority of commands are using something that is called Resource Builder for interacting with the cluster, at least for retrieving the resources. And this will be the recommended way. There are cases like API resources, API versions. These will be directly using the Discovery client from from within client Go, because the resource builder is specifically for working with resources, mostly for retrieving the resources, and then through a visitor pattern you're applying some change that you care about, and then sending it back over to the server. There is a unstructured client, if I remember correctly, in the majority of cases. But the overall goal is we need to ensure that what Phil said earlier today as well is that we do we make the commands so they don't hard code API types in any way. So that's why we will be leaning towards dynamic client, the unstructured client, or something that will allow the discoverer to provide us the information to work with the resources rather than directly working with the Golang types for specific resources, because this is what we want to get rid of entirely in the next probably 5 to 10 years for kubectl, so that it is actually a fully dynamic, supports all of the extensions through working with the API.
Can I ask a favor for everyone? I think there's a way to give feedback on these sessions. And like, this is something new with the more questions, less slides sort of thing. So if you all care how we do this next time, go ahead, send the feedback. And if you like the questions thing, we'll do more of that. If you want more slides, we'll do more of that.
Yeah, especially that we the CFP for KubeCon North America opened a week ago or something. And so we will be signing up for a SIG CLI session in San Diego. So it would be nice to gather the feedback from you guys and try to shape the next sessions per your preference.
I think we're basically out of time. I'll check and see if the next speaker's here. But yeah, if you have more questions, I can hang out in the hallway or something like that. It's a break. It's a break? Oh, we don't have another speaker? All right. Fantastic. All right. Y'all want to keep going? Are there more questions?
I'm from the 6doc team in Kubernetes, and we are working a lot on localization of the content and documentation and the website. And probably next move in the next year will be trying to add it's a hard word for me, internationalization for the tools. Do you think that has sense work on kubectl?
It's already done. Actually, the mechanism for internationalization, yeah, that's I14N is definitely much easier. But yes, the mechanisms are already there. I think Brandon worked on that one.
Are you talking about the book, or are you talking about the other stuff?
The kubectl and the internationalization, so that it can translate kubectl.
Well, so we have the kubectl book.
No. The you wanna.
The command line. The command line.
It is already.
Oh,
the mechanism is already in place. You just have to. Yeah, Brendan.
Help when it. Yeah, we would love someone to do that.
All you need to do is
but it might
pick up the PO files that are already there, and then just open a PR with the language of your choosing and have that one merged. That's not a problem. I'm not sure how far it is or how up to date. If you're happy and interested in working on that one, sure. Yeah, I don't see any problems on that one, especially that we have the thing already in place.
Who here uses the help message in the command line? Show of hands. All right, about half. All right, who here uses the kubectl book? Show of hands. Couple people. All right, who here is aware that there is a kubectl book? All right, a couple more people. Okay, so there is we rewrote the kubectl documentation in the past 6 months. I'd encourage everyone to check it out. It's done as a Git book, which is kind of like the Rust style documentation, and so it has a linear workflow, which means you can kind of go through chapter by chapter. It's a new experiment. All right, one last question. Who uses the main docs for kubectl? Okay. So anyone who didn't raise their hand at all, how do you learn about kubectl? Hearsay. Twitter. Okay. Last question, maybe? Yeah.
How you want to keep two source codes at the same time? It will be kind of mirroring, or because you want to migrate and keep in the course?
Yeah.
So what was the question?
The question is about staging repo, how it works. So currently, there is this Kubernetes kubectl repo. Sean, which is co-chairing SIG CLI, sent out an email 2 days ago or 3 days ago that we will be pruning the contents of that repo. So if you use contents of Kubernetes kubectl, there is a backup, and generally that contents were never officially published in any reasonable way, and was definitely not in sync with what we have in kubectl itself. Kubectl still lives in the main Kubernetes repo under package kubectl. Having said that, the workflow will look like this. We are in the process of moving the code from package kubectl over to, there's a staging k.io / kubectl. This is where we'll be gradually moving the entire package kubectl. The end goal is to have all of kubectl related stuff living in just that repo.
Except for the CLI runtime and all the other stuff.
Yeah, CLI runtime is already in staging and it's being published. We need to think about moving that one outside probably as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't thought about that one before. Eventually, so once we're past this step and we have everything in staging, we have something that is called a publishing bot. I think it runs every 3-4 hours. Can't remember exactly, but more or less. And that bot is responsible for publishing the entire contents of the staging repo. Currently, if you look into the staging repo, you'll see that there's API machinery extensions, API server, CLI runtime, client Go, API itself, and whatnot. And these are then published to respective Kubernetes repos. So if you go to Kubernetes API, this is the official API for Kubernetes that we consume in kubectl, and the Kubernetes repo itself consumes. But to change it, you need to change it inside of the staging repo. That's how we will be publishing the contents of kubectl over the next couple of months. Once we figure out the cases for how we are going to release kubectl, how we are going to test kubectl itself as well as Kubernetes, because what is important is that the majority of the tests inside of E2Es, inside of Kubernetes, well, maybe not majority, that was probably overstatement. Some number of the tests E2Es rely on kubectl binary to be present during invoking E2Es. We need to figure out how to invoke the tests, and at the same time, we need to figure out how we can get a fully running Kubernetes cluster to perform a kubectl test, because those that we will move with kubectl, we need to still execute the set of tests. So we need to figure out testing, releasing, and whatnot. Once we will be happy with all those procedures in place, we will actually cut the line. We will remove kubectl from the staging. The publishing will stop, and we will continue working on just kubectl repo. What is important, the publishing bot is applying the commit. So if you look through history inside of one of the published repos, you'll easily see the commit history as it is happening inside of the main Kubernetes repo. Does that answer your question, more or less? Okay, cool, thanks. Okay, thank you very much, I guess.
I'm going to be hanging out at the Google booth probably tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'll probably tweet about when I am. So if you want to ask questions, you can come find me. I don't know, where are you going to be? How do people track you down?
Twitter, Slack. I rarely hang out at our booth.
You really hang out? You want to hang out with me at the Google booth?
I think we're close.
Yeah, we're close. We're next to each other. It's good.
Yeah.
We'll hang out between the two.
Yes, yeah, that would be good.
All right, thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah.